Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. It looks like Liam Lawson's career in Formula 1 could be over already, with big rumours emerging last night that Yuki Tsunoda will not only get the drive in Suzuka, but that Lawson might be out of a drive entirely, with Franco Colapinto potentially coming into the Racing Bull instead. What has driven this change of heart so quickly? Because the wording coming out of Christian Horner, out of Helmut Marko, is not the defensive wording they used for so long with Sergio Perez last year. It seems like, to some degree, this decision is either very close to being made or has already been made, and there are certainly some characters in the scene that believe that Lawson is already gone. Big rumour though that Max Verstappen actually doesn't want Yuki as his teammate because he feels like this car will again ruin another career of a very promising driver. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Wow, we have a lot to get into today. I should probably change the bottom right hand side to Suzuka round 3, which I'll do in a second after we talk about this result from China. So, George Russell, he has had two very under-the-radar weekends. In Australia and in China, he wasn't on the broadcast much, he just drove and he executed an excellent Grand Prix on both occasions. Qualified very well, impressively so, in China as well, nearly on pole position in the end. Yes, Norris eventually got him. I mean, realistically, there wasn't much he was going to be able to do about the pace that the McLarens had, but he's executed some very impressive weekends. And Russell's put himself in a nice position, right? The podiums that he's had so far in the season, he's in a nice spot. The sprint race as well was pretty okay. And Wolf says that it was a 10 out of 10 performance from George. And even George said it was probably one of his best weekends in Formula 1. So George does seem to be taking well to the team leader role at Mercedes right now and executing well. And I wouldn't completely rule him out of the discussion because, look, who knows? Maybe Max and Lando, the McLaren regresses, the Red Bull gets better, Max and Lando start taking each other out. I mean, the Mercedes gets better as well. It's not impossible that George could be, one of those titles like a Keke Rosberg, right? Where he's not exactly winning loads of Grand Prix, but if he's just in the mix every single time, then he's always going to be there or thereabouts, at least being in the conversation. Whether he can maintain that consistency, that is a question mark. But what's interesting about this situation, right, is that we know that for next year, 2026, there are big rumours that the Mercedes engine is going to be the dominant force in Formula 1 again. And it's going to be a 2014 repeat. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. Of course, we're never going to know until we turn up to the track. But there is a feeling that these cars are going to be complicated in 2026, and Mercedes are probably going to have the fastest machine as a result, or at least a Mercedes-powered car will be in that position. Of course, it could be McLaren, Williams maybe, who knows. But for next year, Max, if the Red Bull continues on the current path that it's on, I mean, he's literally talking about not putting Yuki, apparently, in the Red Bull because he thinks that the car is so tricky to drive that any driver that doesn't have his style and his ability, frankly, will not have a good time with it. And it may have already killed Lawson's career just 2 races into his Red Bull career, as kind of remarkable as that is. But if he could leave and could be available, Mercedes would have to think about it. So as good as George currently is being, the funny thing is for Toto is that he's not, saying, oh, George, sign the dotted line. Maybe he is, but I don't think that he necessarily should, depending on what could potentially happen going forwards. Now, Ferrari, of course, have not had a good start to the year. It's kind of crazy to think about that Esteban Ocon, especially after what happened in Australia, has 10 points, and Hamilton and Leclerc have fewer than that, of course, after their opening couple of weekends. Ferrari, yeah, I mean, as Duquesne says, hit rock bottom in every sense. The rumour has it that it's funny how this works. We saw this even the first couple of laps, not really saw this, but when they were doing the runs around Fiorano, you could see that the front end of that Ferrari was super hooked up, it seems, whereas, the rear wasn't always following in the right way, and according to Duquesne anyway, the rear end is just a bit too weak, and that's what's causing them problems that they're then trying to compensate with, and of course it's causing them plenty of issues all over the shop. And their technical director Loic Serra is working on the first updates. Rumour has it that in Bahrain, so in a couple of rounds time, there's going to be upgrades on the car. So I think maybe though the issue is for them is that there's always a lead time in place. Did they know the problems they're having and how to solve them when they were designing the upgrades they're going to bring for Bahrain? We'll see. Will they by Bahrain just be, reasonably speaking, too far out of the picture if they can't pick up many more points? it'll be very interesting and fascinating to see how that trends in the near future. But let's talk about the Red Bull Racing situation, because this is Liam Lawson, and this is a fascinating one. Look, was this somewhat inevitable? Possibly. I think Lawson's a solid driver, sure. I think he was okay in the Racing Bull. You know, you guys know my opinion that I don't think that he was the man that they should have promoted, but I understand why they did from like a mindset and a mentality perspective. The issue is for Lawson is that he's not made many friends. Like, I'm not saying that's necessarily an issue, but it doesn't seem like Lawson's done enough to justify staying in the sport as it presently stands. I mean, his obviously opening weekend performances have been horrific in Australia and in China, really struggling with the car in a way that Sergio Perez did, but even not really to this extent. Perez would at least make Q3 on a few occasions, and that's not been the case for Liam Lawson so far. He's been, a million miles off Max. Max is taking the car to places where it can be, but where it wouldn't necessarily be expected to be. And even, some of the overtaken maneuvers and stuff that Lawson has made have had that little air of desperation about them compared, and we've seen that with Perez in recent times as well. I think what's most telling about this situation is the way that Red Bull are talking about it, because last year with Perez, they were very, let's say, accommodating and reassuring until they weren't, right? Like, I think that they were often talking about, oh, well, we're going to give him time. Perez is still a great driver. He's just going through a slump right now, and all this type of stuff. And eventually the tune kind of changed when it became somewhat untenable. But with Lawson, the tune has already long changed. Now, Tsunoda was asked in China if he got the opportunity to come into the car, would he take it? And he was like, for Japan, yeah, for sure. The Red Bull car is faster, which it is. I don't think there's much doubt that the Red Bull is a faster car than the Toro Rosso, the B team. But the Racing Bull, according to Max anyway, is likely easier to drive. I mean, both Yuki and Hadja are having a pretty good time with it so far, whereas the Red Bull clearly has more peak performance, I would say, but it's not clear at all that it will be a good car to drive. Now, but Yuki, look, at the end of the day, if you don't back yourself, you don't have the confidence, then what are you going to do? But we've seen so many drivers chewed up and spit out and, churned out. I mean, even with Daniel Ricciardo, the situation last year, he was really the only man that could kind of make that Red Bull work a few years ago. Would it have been true if they'd have brought Ricciardo back in this year? Probably not. But look, Tsunoda straight up says, yeah, put me in the car. Now, Lawson actually responded to this and said the following. He can say whatever he wants. I raced him for years, raced him in the junior categories, and I beat him. So, look, it is what it is. If these Formula 1 drivers are and should be very competitive indeed. Lawson, obviously a talented driver, but a driver with a little bit of an edge, shall we say. Also, is he really correct here? I think that's another argument. I mean, look, sure, there have been ups and downs in both of their careers, but in recent times, Tsunoda has always out-qualified Lawson. Not always out-raced him, but mostly out-qualified and outscored and everything over the last couple of times they've been teammates. And of course, the funny thing is that even now Lawson's at Red Bull, Tsunoda's still out-qualifying and out-racing him and everything that is going on right about there. So, Christian Horner also did not rule this out for the Japanese Grand Prix. Now, I think this would be, I don't want to say a mistake exactly, because I think that this may prove inevitable that Lawson has to go. I'm not massively surprised by the fact that he's not performing, unfortunately. It seems very expected, actually. I thought that he would do a bit better than this, and I thought that he would get a bit more time, because this is clearly a tricky car to drive. He has no experience at Australia. He has no experience, really, as far as I understand, at China either. Japan is a circuit where Liam Lawson has quite a lot of history. He drove there in Super Formula, I'm almost certain. He's driven a fair bit around Japan before, around that Suzuka circuit. So if there's any Grand Prix were to say, okay, if he was well prepared, this is what Lawson could do, you might say the Japanese Grand Prix is the way to go and say, look, we'll give him at least 3 races, we'll give him the Japanese Grand Prix, and if that doesn't work, then Yuki's in the car. But the other complicating factor here to some extent is that, well, Yuki is Japanese. They've got the Honda partnership. There is a good argument to say that it would be the perfect time to put Yuki in the car for Japan for all those other factors. And if they don't believe that Lawson's going to do any better than Yuki, and maybe they're realizing, at least as far as I'm concerned, that, well, maybe they should have just done this in the off-season anyway, and it should have been Yuki promoted, and Lawson, let's just say, not promoted, then They could have done this before. Maybe they're realizing, okay, now probably we made a mistake. Let's just do what we should have done in the first place, and we might as well waste no more time on the matter, which is, typically how Red Bull operate. If they want to make a decision, they go ahead and they make that decision. This was the article here from F1 Insider talking about the situation, right? Because Marko said after the weekend, F1 is a competitive sport, but apparently the truth is this: Lawson's fate has already been lifted. Racing Bull's driver Yuki Tsunoda will replace Lawson in the Red Bull at his home race in Japan. The New Zealander is expected to find his way back to strength by swapping races with the Japanese driver back in the junior team. Now, that's a possibility. There's also another interesting possibility as well. And of course, if Yuki then gets slammed, then maybe Lawson comes back in for races where he's more confident. I mean, who knows? Red Bull are a mess. They're basically a one-car team, and they have been for a while. Good luck winning the Constructors' Championship with that. And look, the funny thing is about the Red Bull situation, and people are going to criticise Helmut Marko, and look, he deserves criticism on many occasions, I think, but equally, the Red Bull Junior program has brought up talented drivers that have gone on to achieve great things at other teams. It's just Red Bull does not seem capable of getting that out of them at all. And, I think the way that the car has been designed is part of that, but obviously it works for Max. So, it's a to and a fro. But Max says that he's not happy with this decision, apparently, because the Dutchman believes the engineers have a duty to build a racing car that can be driven to the limit by more than just him. Furthermore, Tsunoda's participation in his home race in Japan could ruin the next promising career of a Red Bull Junior. I think the Yuki has been good enough that even if he, comes into Red Bull and it doesn't go to plan, I still think he'll be okay. But, still it would be, I want to see it. I want to see how he gets on. So Ralf Schumacher saw this article, of course, and said the following: there's a report from F1 Insider, and I also checked it. Lawson is already out of the Red Bull for the next race in Suzuka, and Tsunoda will replace him. Not confirmed yet, but apparently this is the case. So, Ralf Schumacher seems to imply that he's kind of checked this with his own sources. He's asked around a couple of people, and they have given him exactly the same answer, that Lawson is going to be out of the next race and Tsunoda is in. Would anyone really have predicted this so soon? I mean, we were expecting Jack Doohan to be the first man out of the Alpine, and he's not had a good start to the season either. The penalty points that he's accrued already, 4 penalty points he accrued from the incident in China. Colapinto's likely to come in there. But would I have expected Lawson to get at least half a year? I mean, yeah, I expected him to get half a season, to be honest. Then I thought maybe they'd put Yuki in. But the idea that he's got 2 races, it's obviously been horrific for him, but nonetheless, 2 races. You got to think that Red Bull, they must know something in addition to what we know to not give him any more time. There must just be a feeling based on feedback or understanding or on car design or car setup or whatever, that they just know that it's not going to work at all, and they at least want to try Yuki. But to do so this early is kind of incredible to think about. Now, the other piece of the puzzle is a bit of drama on Franco Colapinto. Now, I mean, this would be wild, and it would really confuse me as to what the hell Red Bull are doing, to be honest, if they were actually to go on and do this. But Colapinto joined Alpine from Williams last year. I think he's on something like a 5-year deal as a reserve driver. And, it seemed like that's his best chance of getting a drive in Formula 1 this year. That's exactly what James Vowles said when they sold him. And of course, there's a feeling, right, that Colapinto will get the drive at Alpine soon enough. But Colapinto was linked at times last year to the drive at Racing Bulls, right, to the Toro Rosso seat, potentially. And where this gets kind of interesting is the possibility that maybe, Franco Colapinto could come in to the Racing Bulls team and Lawson would just be out of the team entirely. It might be something that they're working on to think about. Let's say Yuki comes into Red Bull and equally just gets destroyed by Max and can't handle the car at all. Then what do you do? Does Yuki drop back down again? Do you, try and get Colapinto? But of course, that would not be free and easy to do. But it does now seem like, at least to some degree, that Helmut Marko has got his way. We know that he's been a big fan of Yuki Tsunoda. He said Yuki's a different Yuki now than in previous years. And even there were rumours from Christian Horner that the test that Red Bull did with Tsunoda back in December was actually very impressive from Yuki. So, look, who knows what the reality is here, but there's a feeling everyone is talking in a way that implies Lawson is gone and Tsunoda is in. Will that work in the long term? Who knows? It does make this video from whatever this was all the more entertaining, actually, of Yuki taking the seat from underneath Liam Lawson. So yeah, I think that deserves a like there from Cameron, really, because this is potentially exactly what is happening in real life going forward. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Just one final thing to mention, that there was a lot of talk today about this V10s, the return of V10s, and exactly what the teams are going to do about it. Audi has come out with a statement to suggest they are against the introduction of the V10s. They want to come in and make the engines in the way that they want to make the engines. But it seems that Ferrari and Red Bull are key supporters for a shift over to V10s because they just don't think that, these new regulations in 2026 are going to be any good, and also likely because they're probably somewhat behind the curve. Rumour has it that Mercedes don't necessarily hate it. There's lots of interesting things in this article, actually, so I'll leave a link down below if you guys want to check it out in great detail. But what's interesting about Mercedes is that there's a feeling that they will have the strongest engine in 2026, and that would be very scary for the rest of the grids. But also they are open to the option of going to a V8 or a V10 as well. So Tota says you need to be open-minded. We're all racers, like the engine. We like the engines of the past. Then you need to strike the right balance between what's exciting to us dinosaurs, screaming loud engines, and then what the fan base wants, and then also what the manufacturers want, which is fundamentally who Toto Wolff represents. So if you guys aren't aware, the current plan is going to be to run that regulation set until 2030, but potentially they may change it 2 whole years earlier. And look, if Audi don't want it, it might be a difference maker, but it may not be, right? Because if Mercedes and Honda agree with Ferrari and Red Bull, then it's going to be happening regardless, right? That's basically what the governance agreement requires. So Audi's kind of opposition may not mean that much, and of course they could also change their mind in due course as well. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.